Morning, everybody. Andy here again. It's Saturday. It's the weekend. I know it doesn't feel any different to normal. That's the way of the world at the moment. The way of life generally. I think we're all getting very used to it. The figures down below. Yesterday, the daily deaths were 684. So it's a sort of a plateau at the moment in that respect. And the total now is 19,506. So we're getting very, very close to that 20,000 figure, which I said before the government thought would be a good result. There's never a good result. There's one thing actually, I keep mentioning all these figures like 684, 600 a day before that, maybe it's 500, maybe it's sort of 700 or something. And I'm guilty of it as much as anybody else, is getting very blasé about that because you think, just quoting the figures every day as I've done to keep this sort of daily record, this daily diary. But every one of those numbers is a person. And you tend to forget that. 19,506 people have died because of coronavirus in hospital in the UK alone. And we know how many there are across the world. That is a lot of people. And every one of those people was someone's mother, father, son, daughter, grandfather, etc., etc. So sometimes you have to remember that because we're getting, not saying getting blasé about it, but you just keep hearing these figures over and over again, and you tend to forget how relevant they are unless it actually touches you personally, which hopefully it hasn't, but I know for a lot of people it will have done, and you have my sympathy because I'm sure lots of people are feeling that same sort of way, and sometimes you need that sort of realisation, which we did yesterday. We were talking about it yesterday, and that sort of thought just hit us. That's a person. Every one of those numbers is a person. So, right, daily album yesterday. Well, it wasn't one. That's the window. Life goes on in the in the household, and the doors slamming. So, but daily album yesterday. I didn't actually do a daily album yesterday. The reason for that was because I mentioned the other day about being involved with a local radio station and the way that we're having to change, which I'll come to in a minute. But I actually ended up recording a podcast, a 2-hour program, because I'm doing two 2-hour slots pre-recorded for the radio station, which is going out on the internet starting next Saturday, actually a week today. And I'll put a link below later on. And as I said, we're broadcast on the internet, and I've always wanted to do like a punk and new wave sort of special, because a lot of those CDs are up there, that sort of era, 76, 77, 78, and even 79 and that. I was a teenager at the time, so it affected me. We've all got those periods of our lives, where we were when we were teenagers, and the music that was around at that time really affected us. For me, it was that. I mean, I loved the rock music as well, and I grew up with that as well. But when the punk sort of new wave thing came along, I was just at the right age for it to hit me. I've always been a bit of a rebellious type of person, and I just loved the way that it shook everything up. Not just music; it shook the whole establishment up. It changed the way that people did things. The whole DIY, do-it-yourself culture with record labels, even bands, and that's part of the point that I make in the podcast. So I recorded that last night. So I just thought I'd show you a couple of the singles, because one of the things that I said, just about every single track that I played, there was like 35 tracks in 2 hours, because they used to pack them in those days, and they were all released as singles, and I have most of them. I still have I've got a big box full of about 1,000 still vinyl singles, like this one. There we are. This is the band called The Damned. There we go, that's what it says there. And this is the first UK punk single that came out in 1976 on the Stiff record label. And the B-side was actually Help. And you thought that everyone was rebelling against the Beatles. So there's a bit of a different version to the one And this one, I'm sure you'll recognise this if you anyway. This is Anarchy in the UK by the Sex Pistols. The one that really shook everything up. It came out in, I think it's November of 1976, one of the first sort of punk new wave singles that I bought. And as I say in the podcast or in the programme, is that, with that and then the Bill Grundy episode, anyone in the UK who is old enough will remember, that really shook the foundations of the establishment, the filth and the fury, they called it, because of what was said on that particular show, goaded as they were by Bill Grundy, I must say. But it wasn't just UK bands that were involved with the sort of punk thing and the new wave thing. A lot of people would say that a lot of that music came from America, especially in New York. And this is one New York band, Blondie. This is one of their first ever singles on the Private Stock record label before they signed to Chrysalis. And this is actually a double A side called In the Flesh an ex-offender. Great, and I've got 2 copies of that. So I wonder if it's worth anything now. I mean, I know some of them are because they're valuable items. It's the same with anything. The older something gets, the more the originals get thrown away. So there's a scarcity value, but one of the whole points I wanted to talk about, actually, to do with the radio station, is that we normally broadcast for 28 days during May. It's a long story as to why that is, so don't maybe that's a story for another day. I've probably done a video about that somewhere. But obviously, we were going to do a lot with a normal FM normal broadcast on air, via the usual ways, and with the central studio and everything like this. But it quickly became apparent after our last meeting, as it happened, that we weren't going to be able to do that. We didn't really realise the implications at first. We knew that this was coming, the COVID-19 was coming, but you don't really think about the implications of it until someone pointed out, and you think, well, actually, we can't even convene in a studio. We can't have a central studio because people coming in, changing over, meeting each other. Obviously, no social distancing really could be carried out in that respect. And obviously, everyone's touching all the equipment and all that sort of stuff. It quickly became apparent that we couldn't do that. So we had to reluctantly sort of change our plans there, which also meant that we wouldn't be able to have any advertising. We wouldn't be able to have any events that we usually use for fundraising, no sponsorship or anything, because of completely the way that we had to change. And there's a bit of a sort of analogy with everything else that's going on. Everybody is having to adapt, and we've had to adapt to what we're doing. So we are now going to do purely an internet radio station for 28 days, starting next Saturday. But that's a steep learning curve because we've never done that before. We broadcast on the internet, but we just put the usual FM stream, if you want, what will come out of your radio, and just play it via the internet, which is what just about every other station does that you can hear. All the BBC stations, etc., do that. But now we're just going to be purely an internet radio station, and we are effectively, all the DJs that are doing it, are working from home because they are having to do it like this. They could do it sitting on this table, by their table with a laptop and that type of thing. But that's a whole learning curve. Luckily, we've got a very good computer man who does a bit of this sort of stuff anyway, and programming, who's enabling us to do it because we're still working on it. But we're pretty much there now. But this is what every other radio station is doing. You'd be listening to your radio at home now, and Radio 1, Radio 2, in the UK, all those commercial stations that you're listening to, and probably where you are as well. All of those DJs will be working from home. They will be sitting in some sort of office type environment, some sort of room, and they've probably never done this before. Obviously, internet radio stations that broadcast all the time are used to this. Radio Caroline that I mentioned the other day does that. So it's a steep learning curve, and one of those things also, I was the chairman of Hastings Rock Radio for a number of years, about 8 years, but I moved away I think it was about 6 years ago, and a guy called Tony took over. He decided to step down last year for this broadcast, and I came back in again, was asked to come back in, was voted back in, and you think, oh, that's all right, we all know what we're doing, and it's a bit like the government in lots of ways. You think, yeah, we know what we're doing, Boris gets elected, I become chairman. I'm not suggesting in the same league, but you think, yeah, we know what we're doing, and then suddenly, bang, this COVID-19 coronavirus comes along and everything changes, and you have to adapt very, very quickly and change the whole direction of where you were going. Other things become more important. So I do sympathise in some ways, and I'm sure we will make mistakes, the same as any government and any person in authority who's having to make decisions will make mistakes as well. So it's a steep learning curve, but we're getting there. But the thing is, you need a good team behind you, and I certainly have got a good team working with that I'm working with, and we're getting there by pulling together, and that's what you need to do. That's what we've got to do, full stop, isn't it? Pull together, that the message has been about all the time. Anyway, I'll put the links below. I've got to record it. I recorded one podcast last night, or program. I've got to do another one next week. So I've given it a listen. It doesn't sound bad, but it's not quite the same as being in a radio studio, which is why your radio station might not sound quite the same. It's a bit different when you're sitting in a room as opposed to a proper studio, which has got a slightly different atmosphere to it, and maybe other people are around as well. Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. As usual, stay at home, even if it's nice, which it is at the moment, actually. Stay strong, stay safe, and I shall speak to you tomorrow, hopefully. Goodbye.